Hello, my name is Cynthia Demise. I am the project manager of the new Pride Agenda. This is our second virtual town hall. The new Pride Agenda is a very young startup, nonprofit, focusing on the most underserved of the LGBTQ communities. We have a very diverse board of directors. We are beginning organized in New York City, but we will be going to Westchester, Long Island, Upstate. We have a new board member, Rick Sanchez, from Rochester, and others will be joining us shortly. And we essentially are here to work with many LGBT allies and advocates in the community regarding two major focuses. One is state advocacy, and we spent a great deal of time this past fall working on the whole issue of gender implementation, because sometimes when you pass laws, unless there's aggressive action, regulation, cultural change to follow up, they become fellow. So we did a lot of work on that all fall. We're very happy that the governor included mandated transgender training for 340,000 state employees, I think at first in the nation. And we were also going to work on other major issues such as implementation of dignity for all students, trying to increase the health and human service budget statewide, etc. Our second focus is education, public education and civic engagement. So we have partnered with Dr. Esther Fuchs at Columbia University School of International Policy on a research-based way to get more in our community involved and civically engaged. And we were, in fact, going to begin programming in 20 particular this April. But as life would have it, COVID-19 has hit, and we are very committed to quickly pivoting to where our community has the most serious needs. And our team on the ground, Ahmed Mohammed and Jason Walker, basically have advised us about a great deal of concerns of the community. So we decided to pivot and to focus on virtual town halls. Last week, we focused on healthcare, addiction, elderly. Today, we're going to focus on young LGBT people in the community. So just to begin, we have also a very special guest going to join us shortly. But just to begin, I want to go to my team, Ahmed and Jason, and give you a little bit of logistics about how the program will go. Ahmed?
Awesome. Thank you, Cynthia, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I wish the best for everyone. Hope you guys are staying safe and healthy during these uncertain times. I'd like to thank those who are joining us for our second iteration of our virtual town hall series, and also extend a warm welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. My name is Ahmed Mohammed, as Cynthia just said. I graduated from Duke University this past May, moved to New York right after, and have been working with the New Pride Agenda, building out this startup nonprofit, and trying to engage the community ever since for the past 7 months or so. I'm hopeful we'll be able to have the opportunity to meet in person soon, but until then, this virtual connection is crucial to maintaining community, especially given tonight's topic, our LGBTQ youth, and how isolating it may feel to not be with family and friends during these times. A few housekeeping rules as the logistics point man for tonight. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please ask questions along the bottom of your screen. You should see a Q&A feature. If you upload your questions into that feature, I'll silo them, funnel them to our host, and make sure that you guys are in the queue and get your questions addressed. Also, in the spirit of being interactive, if you hover to the top right of your screen, you should be able to click gallery view, which allows you to see all of us in a Brady Bunch style. If you're already in gallery view, it should say speaker view and you're all set. And then lastly, if you're running into any trouble, please don't hesitate to shoot me a text. My number is 571-309-3305. I'll also paste that number shortly in the Q&A section along the bottom, so you'll all have it. and I'm excited for the discussion we're about to have. I'll pass it off to Jason, who will give us some context about the programming tonight before we swing it back to Cynthia to introduce our special opening remarks. Thanks, everyone.
Hey everyone, Jason Lamar here. Just wanted to just extend greetings and welcomes for everyone taking the time to be with us this evening as we talk about a really important issue during a really critical time. COVID-19 has impacted all of us as New Yorkers, as Americans, as world citizens. This epidemic and pandemic has impacted us all, and one of the things we wanted to be intentional about is making sure we create space for community, create a space for conversation about how this pandemic is impacting LGBTQ folks. This particular event tonight is going to focus on LGBTQ young people, youth, and young adults. And we have brought together a panel of leaders and experts in respective fields to talk about how this pandemic has impacted our community, particularly the most vulnerable. I'm going to go just give a quick introductions of who our panelists are. We have Jordyn, who is a youth advisory member from GLSEN Upstate. Jordyn is an amazing youth advocate, according from my conversation with her, been organizing and been out there for the community since she's been in the stroller. Has been really doing amazing work in the capital region of our state for LGBTQ folks, particularly young folks. Next, we have Quasi Douglas, who is the Crisis Service Senior Manager of Digital Services for Trevor Project. As you know, Trevor Project is a world leader, national leader in supporting LGBT young people in suicide prevention. Next, we have Alex, who is the Executive Director of Ali Forney. Ali Forney is the largest provider of services for LGBT young people. Homeless youth in the city, and we're so honored and privileged to have him with us today. And next we have Delilah Luna, who is the interim coordinator of training and capacity building at the Ackerman Institute for the Family. So we have a very lovely panel here. But before we actually toss it over to our moderator, we do have a very special and exciting guest here with us today. But now I'm going to turn it back over to Cynthia, who's going to do the introduction for this piece.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Ahmed. Our special guest for this evening, Speaker Corey Johnson. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his history and accomplishments, but just to cite a couple things. Corey, of course, was elected Speaker in 2018, and that was following his leadership in Council District, largely downtown, but going as far as Columbus Circle, etc. In '99, he got some national recognition as not only being captain of his football team up in Massachusetts, but coming out as gay. And you look as good today, Corey, as you did in that picture a few years ago. You must remember that. And at 19, he came to New York City and became an activist regarding LGBTQ issues as well as tenant issues, very much so. And was also, of course, chair of Community Board 4, as many of you are familiar with. Regarding accomplishments, in terms of LGBT funding, there is a remarkable $19 million. We have never seen anything of that size in new LGBT funding over the past year. $2.3 million was for Trans Equity Initiative. Co-chair of our board is Cecilia Gentili. We know a number of people worked on that with the speaker. Unheard of to have that kind of support, really. And in addition, there was an initiative done with our friend Danny Drum regarding including LGBT inclusion in the schools, a major initiative, and also with Councilmember Helen Rosenthal, essentially worked on developing a task force that will focus on LGBT issues in corrections. I want to add one comment. I was a former lobbyist, and I just want to say something remarkable. I'm really grateful, Corey, that you have provided a real robust, serious balance of power within the city council. There are many entities which are sort of the structural complement to leaders. And from the first moment you came out with a strong initiative regarding half fare MTA, I was like, wow, hold on for the ride. And I just want to say on a personal level, just as we are so focused on underserved in this community, the LGBT is our umbrella, you clearly are. And I'm very grateful for that. And I really deeply appreciate your leadership. So on behalf of our community, thank you, and our community and more regarding the underserved. Corey, please jump in.
Thank you, Cynthia. I want to say hi to everyone. It's so nice to be with you all. And I want to thank all the organizers, my friend Cynthia, who is just a wonderful human being and someone who's always trying to help people across our city and our state. And I want to thank Ahmed and Kwesi and Jordyn and Alex and Delilah and my good friend Jason Walker, who I love. And I want to thank my colleague, who you're going to hear from in a few moments, Ritchie Torres, who is one of the other openly LGBT members of the City Council. I want to just talk about a few things tonight, just to kind of give an overview, I think, of where we are as a city generally, and then to speak more specifically about the needs of LGBT youth, homeless LGBT people, and what we are doing and attempting to do in New York City in this painful, unprecedented moment that we are living in. So again, I want to thank the New Pride Agenda for organizing this really important call. So, you know, we continue, as you all know, to socially distance and to physically isolate to bend the curve. And the numbers the last few days for the city of New York are not as bad as they were last week, but they are still immensely tragic and painful on the number of lives that we've lost, on the number of people that are hospitalized, and what that is doing to so many families and individuals and communities across this city. And the LGBT community, of course, has been affected and not spared by this really awful virus as well. So the most important, I think, collective thing that we can continue to do as New Yorkers is to continue to socially distance, to eventually bend and crush that curve, and to think about our healthcare heroes and essential workers while we are doing that. But even though we are socially distancing, and this is why this is so important, I have the chills actually right now looking at these wonderful faces of these amazing people that I'm joining tonight. It's really, really important for us to stay emotionally connected to each other in this time of physical isolation and social distancing. And we know that the LGBT community, especially LGBT young people, were at risk before this. And in the midst of this epidemic, where New York City is the epicenter of the entire country, that communities that have dealt with historic inequities for years, structural racism for years, that we are seeing the glaring holes in our social safety net right now and how that is affecting the disadvantaged and the vulnerable. And LGBT youth, of course, are part of that. The hardest hit communities across New York City have been communities of color, have been low-income communities, and they have had to withstand this disproportionate impact of this virus. And one of the things that we have been trying to do in the council, and Ritchie, who is one of the best members in the entire city council, and my brother and my friend, he's someone who can speak to his own personal experience the last few weeks recovering from COVID-19, and I'm so happy to see him looking healthy on this screen tonight. One of the things we have been trying to do is the city is facing one of the worst financial crises that we have ever faced as a city since the 1970s. The numbers that came out today show that we have a $2.5 billion hole that's been blown into our budget in the current fiscal year we're in, which ends July 1st, and upwards of a $6 billion hole on top of that for the next fiscal year. So it could be more than $8 billion of a hole in the city's budget in a short amount of time. That affects everything. But the reason why I'm raising it tonight is we as a council want to make sure that whatever difficult, painful decisions that we have to make in the city's budget, that we are not doing it on the backs of vulnerable communities, that we are not undermining the social safety net even more than it has been undermined in the past from a hostile federal government that has not looked out for communities of color and poor people and communities that have been affected by HIV and AIDS and diabetes and all of these illnesses that we know are comorbidities right now and are really taking the toll for folks that get COVID-19. So when it comes to LGBT youth, one of the things that we have been looking at more generally is we are starting to look at legislation, and we've been pushing the legislation outside of the legislative process to get hotel rooms for homeless New Yorkers. Homeless New Yorkers that are in congregate hotel settings where it's harder to socially distance, and hotel rooms for chronically street homeless New Yorkers where LGBT youth fit into that category. We need special types of hotel rooms that have the right social services attached. I know Housing Works, which does amazing work for LGBT people and communities that are affected by HIV and AIDS, I believe opened up the first COVID-19 homeless hotel in New York City with services attached. They're looking to open up a second hotel that provides that. So we're looking at that issue. We also need to make sure that we are providing the services for folks that may not come indoors right now. There are plenty of chronically homeless people that aren't taking the city up on its offers to come inside. So for those folks, we need to make sure that they have access to mobile showers, mobile hand washing stations, food that is being given out by folks in this moment. We need to make sure that we are adapting to the moment we're in. The last thing I will say as it relates to LGBT youth is we have never had to close down our schools before, and I think it was the right decision, but we know that it's having a disproportionate impact on communities that are already experiencing all sorts of inequities. We know that domestic violence has not gone away in the midst of this pandemic. We know that child abuse has not gone away in the midst of this pandemic. We know that family rejection has not gone away in the midst of this pandemic. We know that there are still plenty of people that are experiencing suicidality in the midst of this epidemic. And so all of those issues where typically you would have a support network at school for young people where you could connect with teachers and administrators and social workers and guidance counselors. When children aren't able to go to school and they are stuck at home, sometimes in violent and bad circumstances, we need to make sure that organizations like LA Forney, like the Trevor Project, like GLSEN, like the organizations that are represented on this call, that we are giving them the support that they need so that they can be doing the virtual outreach to these communities to make sure they are getting connected emotionally to folks that can help them through these difficult times. I will just end with this before I turn it back over. I apologize for speaking too long, but I will just end with this to let you know that I don't want to in any way be Pollyanna-ish about how painful this moment is. And I want to recognize that there are plenty of people that don't have the ability, like me, to be sitting in a warm apartment tonight, having this conversation with you all in this way. And I do believe that New York City is the greatest city in the world, but I don't say that in a way that absolves us from taking responsibility for these vulnerable communities, absolves us from seeing the structural racism that has existed for far too long and is more apparent now than ever, absolves us from these deep inequities that we are seeing every single day, absolves us from a homelessness crisis where almost 80,000 New Yorkers were homeless before this pandemic hit New York City. So I believe in our city. I believe that we will get through this together if we look out for one another. But I don't say that in a platitudinal, feel-good way that in any way washes over or tries to obscure the heartache, the pain, and the vulnerability that too many New Yorkers are facing right now. I know Ritchie feels the same way. I know that almost all my colleagues on the council feel that way. And anything that we can do over the course of these next few weeks and few months, where it is, maybe longer, where it is very painful and difficult for folks that are vulnerable, you let us know. The council has been a champion, as Cynthia said, at increasing funding for communities that have been left behind. The transgender community, runaway and homeless youth, people that have engaged in sex work. We have stepped up year after year to provide funding for these communities. And we want to make sure that even in the midst of one of the most painful budget moments the city's ever seen, that we continue to lift up those communities through our advocacy and outreach, but also to make sure that New York City doesn't leave these communities behind as we make these difficult decisions over the next few months. So I want to thank you. My heart is open to all of you. I am sitting in my boyfriend's office in his apartment, and if you look behind me, there is a photo of someone dressed up gorgeously in drag, holding a sign which says, "It takes balls to be a fairy." And this is not a prop. It was in this room before we started this Zoom conference tonight. So I am immensely grateful to the New Pride agenda. I am immensely grateful to all of you for your hard work and advocacy. I am sending you love and strength and anything that I can do and we can do to continue to help all of you. We stand ready to do so. Thank you so much. And I'll stay on for a few moments because I want to hear my dear friend and my brother, Ritchie Torres, speak as well. Thank you, Cynthia, for that kind introduction. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Corey. Heartfelt response back to you. Let's move ahead to my friend Ritchie Torres, been a friend from the beginning. Ritchie, as many of you know, was first elected in 2013 as the first openly gay elected from the Bronx. He chaired the council's committee on oversight and investigations. He was a sponsor and champion of a 2018 runaway and homeless shelter services, allowing shelter services to be provided for younger adults moving from 21 to 24. That was a huge issue in New York and continues around the country. He was really held as a lifesaver for movement on that particular area, and the whole area of chronic homelessness, mental health, etc. Ritchie also started the first LGBT center in the Bronx. I was there at the opening, and it was wonderful. And you are a trailblazer, sir, and you've had my support and love for a long time. And take it over. Thank you.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Cynthia, for your friendship. I just want to thank everyone at the Pride Agenda. Your work has never been more critical, and I want to thank the speaker for his inspiring leadership. These are disorienting times, but I could not imagine a more effective leader for our city than you. And there's no city council that has delivered more resources for the LGBTQ community than the city council under your leadership, and that's hardly an accident. A wise person once said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're going to be on the menu. And we're lucky to have you at the table. I'm City Councilmember Ritchie Torres. My preferred pronouns are he, his, and him. And as has been emphasized, the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak is far-reaching. It's not only a public health crisis, it's an educational crisis, a mental health crisis, a food crisis, a housing crisis. And I hope that we can have a conversation that will touch on the various impacts that this has on the LGBTQ community. We often speak of flattening the curve, but the truth is there is no single curve in New York City. Communities of color, those living in poverty, the LGBTQ youth community are on the deadliest curve. And so I'm just honored to be joined by a panel of organizers, not-for-profit leaders, who have dedicated their lives to providing services to and advocating for LGBTQ youth. It's often frustrating the way we speak about social distancing, often fails to honor the lived experiences of LGBTQ youth. You know, the message of staying at home implies that you have a home at which to stay, when in fact, there are many LGBTQ youth who face disproportionately higher rates of housing insecurity and homelessness. And even if you have a home, you know, how can you practice social distancing within extreme overcrowded conditions, or if you're riding in the crowded conditions of a subway? So I hope that we have a conversation that speaks to the lived experience of the most vulnerable in the LGBTQ community. And so with that said, I'd love to start with anyone who wants to. I know, Alex, maybe we should start with you. You just became the executive director of the Ali Fournier Center. So you've been thrust into the greatest crisis of our lifetime. What has been the impact of COVID-19 and all of its dimensions on your clients, on the LGBTQ youth community?
Thank you, Ritchie, and thank you, Corey, and both of you for all the work you're doing for our community, for your service. It's certainly something that we always appreciate, but especially during these times. You know, at the Ali Fournier Center, we're dealing with young people who, by virtue of their identity, have lived in isolation at home because of their identities in family rejection and homophobia and transphobia, isolation in schools because of bullying and the inherent isolation of coming out and coming of age in homophobic and transphobic environments. And for our young people, once they become homeless, they're also isolated even in homeless services because of just the again, pervasive homophobia and transphobia. And what we're seeing in these times of this pandemic is that our young people are being re-traumatized. A lot of our work was around breaking down that isolation, breaking down those feelings of shame with their identity. And what has happened is that our young people are recognizing that indeed they are being asked to go home. Indeed, they are being asked to find comfort and safety. And for many, for almost all humans, that's with your family. And it's re-traumatizing the fact that they don't have a home, they don't have a family because of their identity. And largely or practically at our sites is really at the core of the work is addressing mental health issues, addressing isolation, connectedness with the young people, offering services, offering support groups. And much like any good family across our 17 sites, we are really working actively to provide engagement for our young people at our sites, to provide them with community, to provide them with services. And we're grateful to so many other organizations that are supporting with that. But it really is an isolating, catastrophic situation for all of us, and it weighs more heavily on those who have been traumatized by isolation because of their identity.
So, you know, Alex, you rightly point out that COVID-19 has compounded just the trauma and social isolation of LGBTQ youth. I'm curious, Kwesi, how you know, the Trevor Project has one of the premier hotlines for LGBTQ youth struggling with mental health, with trauma. How has this affected your work? Are you receiving more calls than ever?
So at the Trevor Project, our volume has definitely increased since the start of COVID-19 and since states have been social distancing. One thing, a lot of the time we equate social distancing with isolation, and it doesn't necessarily need to be an isolating situation. So you can connect with folks digitally if you have the means to connect with folks. And that's why, and so youth have been reaching out to us on our Trevor Lifeline, on our Trevor Text, Trevor Chat, but we are seeing the same issues that folks have mentioned earlier, where, you know, as we know, the LGBTQ community historically has experienced a lot of underemployment, and now with all the unemployment that's happening, youth aren't exempt from this. So the LGBTQ youth are the group that are feeling a lot of the negative outcomes of unemployment. There's worry about themselves and their loved ones as far as, you know, just housing, stable housing, and just health in general.
That's great. Anyone else want to weigh in? Delilah?
Hi, thanks so much, first of all, to New Pride Agenda for hosting this. This is really important, and I'm so glad that we got to hear from Speaker Corey Johnson. We've had the great fortune of working with him before, and he's just really, really wonderful. And thank you to you as well, Ritchie, for really everybody here for just all the work that y'all do. So at the Gender and Family Project, we are a family and youth services program for transgender youth and their families. And so our motto is acceptance is protection. And the reason that that's so important is that a lot of our work is more on the preventative side. So of course, we are constantly thinking about the youth that we have so much trouble reaching because we are a family clinic. That means that we need the parents to be involved. And of course, that leaves a massive question of how do we reach the young ones who do not have the support? How do we reach homeless youth? How do we reach youth who live far, deep into the boroughs of New York City who don't have access to the resources that they should have access to? So these are the questions that we are still thinking about. But I've had the great fortune of running our teen support group for the past year or so. And so just yesterday, I was working with our first virtual session with the teens, and it was just such an honor. I myself am trans, and so it was not too long ago at all, being 25, that I was in an abusive home, and I was with parents who did not accept me, and I was facing complete isolation, and I had no community. And so something that I have found has been online connection. That's perhaps the one gift that we have in the fact that this crisis is happening in this time period where we do have all this technology at our fingertips. It's been amazing. I basically spent 2 hours yesterday doing nothing but just chatting, sharing, funny videos, and just spending time together, connecting kids to resources, hearing them out. They were sharing about the positive things they're experiencing, the fact that they don't have to worry as much about the public scrutiny and the things, the anxiety of being a trans person in the world, but also, the isolation and feeling that they can't see their friends, that they can't make those connections. They're really heartbreaking. And so it was really an honor to spend time with them. But really, so much of our focus is around also supporting parents. And so we have a big clinic with over 200 families. And so we are working with those families so that they can work towards acceptance and more than that, but advocacy, which is the next step in our programming, is that we usually, I also had the great fortune of running a youth advocacy group last fall. And so I was working with some trans teens who were excited to build their leadership skills, who were excited to create change in their communities. And so they did a wonderful rally for in the rain. It was very punk rock. It was very wonderful for trans healthcare rights, particularly for youth. So that's another programming that we're unfortunately had to put on pause for now, but we're trying to rebuild and make that happen as soon as possible as well. So overall, all these ways of trying to build leadership, trying to build skills and connect youth to resources and community. All of this is in the name, again, of our motto, which is acceptance is protection. As the statistics show, I think in the National Trans Discrimination Survey, I believe it's over 40% of trans youth have experienced some kind of family rejection in their lifetime. And as we know, family rejection leads to homelessness, it leads to unemployment, it leads to all kinds of things. So we're really trying to get ahead of that, and by supporting families as much as we can.
Jordyn?
Delilah, thank you for sharing that story, first of all. And I think it beautifully summed up some of the struggles that youth face at home. GLSEN is a nationwide organization that focuses on inclusivity K through 12 schools. And as previously mentioned, we've never had to shut down schools before. So that has been a huge shift in the lives of all students, teachers, faculty, staff of schools. And as an organization that works solely with schools and educators, we have been looking for ways to continue to support those youth that are now home and likely not out at home. In many cases, the school can be their safe space. They look forward to going to GSA meetings if their school has one. And sometimes that's the only day that they go to school, is on GSA day. So GLSEN as an organization has been working to connect to GSA leaders, host virtual GSA meetups, and keep those kids connected without having any sort of outlet. There's definitely that sense of isolation and stripping of identity if you can't use the correct pronouns at home, if you can't use your correct name at home. And if you're a college student, you physically have to leave your place and return home, which is definitely something I think many college students never expected to happen, and they wouldn't have to go back and live full time with that environment ever again. That being said, we're definitely trying our best to get those resources out and still host the events that we would have hosted in schools. Coming up in April, which obviously has to be online at this point, we host a worldwide day of silence, which students stay quiet all day long in school, and then that silence reflects the harassment, the silencing effect that harassment and bullying can have on students. So afterward, we have a Breaking the Silence event, and now we're going all virtual with that. So hopefully that'll help to keep students engaged and have them still have a voice in the community. But there's been an increase in cyberbullying as well, and that is in itself a whole different issue in terms of how it can affect students' mental health and how schools are less able and less equipped to respond to cyberbullying when everything is out of school is out of session.
No, thank you, Jordyn. You know, if you're an LGBTQ youth and you're facing harassment at home, you might look to a GSA or an LGBTQ community center as a second family and as a second home. And so the closing of those safe spaces could mean the loss of a family or home. Like, what advice do any of you have for LGBTQ youth who are struggling with the social isolation that comes with social distancing? How do LGBTQ youth remain socially connected in the midst of social distancing?
You know, for us at the Ali Forney Center, it's really been connecting with providers, connecting with society. I mean, I think we're seeing it across the country and around the world. We're all learning how to work from home. We're all learning how to learn from home. We're all learning how to help from home. And there's this, I think, demand on organizations like ours that we now have to learn how to engage from home. Even for our services, although we run church events throughout the city, we are connected with young people who are living elsewhere, who are not stably housed, who are accessing services. And even the young people in our programs are still accessing other services remotely. And for us, it's really increasing connectedness, having town halls, having meetings, really, as we've done for so long, is to show our young people that there's nothing wrong with them, that there's a life outside of COVID. I think that we all need to be reminded of that. And more so that there's a really big need to push services. All of our mental health services have moved online. Our psychiatric services have moved online, and even our medical services have moved online, and really, really focusing on that. So even case management around that and the scheduling around that and the coordination around that has all shifted. And I think the onus is on us as organizations who are providing care either for housed or unstably housed or homeless young people, really to push structures and systems that allow us to connect with those young people.
Ritchie, on our end, I just wanted to mention, so we have Trevor Space, which is available to LGBTQ youth, and Trevor Space is basically the world's largest safe space for LGBTQ youth, and it's basically a supportive social networking site where youth can build a profile and they can interact and connect with other LGBTQ youth who affirm their identity. And since the beginning of COVID, we've seen our enrollment numbers double. And that's an option that youth also have to use, that they can connect with those folks. And as Jordyn mentioned, a lot with the social distancing, a lot of folks no longer have access to GSAs or a supportive adult. And research has shown that it is so important to have a supportive adult in your life. You know, having just one supportive adult in your life can decrease LGBTQ youth suicidality. So losing that access is so important, the work that you're doing, Jordyn. Just wanted to mention that.
I definitely would echo all of those statements. I think, as I mentioned before, the gift of technology is really wonderful, and being able to connect virtually with folks. So we have our support groups going. We've also managed to move all of our clinical services online via telehealth, and we are also one of the few family clinics in the city that also takes Medicaid. We take most private insurances. We also do sliding scale. So we have families who pay as little as $1 to access our services. And then also on the other side, we're also here, half my titles is capacity building. So I'm the coordinator of training and capacity building. And so we're also thinking about how do we support each other and how do we support other professionals in supporting youth. And so I've spent a lot of my time at Ackerman being able to work directly with schools. I work with their staffs. I work with the parent communities, and I do a lot of psychoeducation around best practices for supporting transgender students. And so in this time period, we've moved all of our trainings online, and I have also been working on developing modules, some educational modules specifically about how can teachers support youth as they get to see a lot of these youth every single day. What should they be on the lookout for? How can they create a curriculum that is more LGBT inclusive? How can they make sure that everybody is emotionally safe, physically safe? So we're really here trying to think of every single level, not just directly with the youth, but also anybody working with youth. And then of course, joining coalitions and organizations like New Pride Agenda and working on policy changes and such. So we're really just trying to think of it at all levels. But ultimately, when it comes down to supporting youth, we're doing our best to just be there every single day and just spending time with them and connecting them to each other and to the resources that they need.
I think everything that anyone has said prior to this has been fantastic in terms of how each organization is responding to that. And I just want to kind of echo what Ritchie said about having that family. It's not that you've lost that family if you are a youth that is at home. And I think that's super important to remember and sometimes kind of hard to see, that even if you don't have that same structured meeting every Monday, Tuesday, or you don't get to see that adult in person, that community still exists for you. And just reminding yourself to not get down on like just this isolation, because it will definitely pass and you will be able to see that family again. But yeah, I really just appreciate Ritchie highlighting that. So
I want to ask a question for one of our audience members, Joey Presley. What should be said to the young person sheltering in place within a homophobic or transphobic household where the young person is experiencing physical and or verbal abuse? Delilah, do you have any thoughts?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yeah, I think that something that I personally would say, I mean, this is just coming from as another trans person, you know, having been through a similar situation, is that you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. You are never alone. There are people out here who love you and need you and want you in the world. And it's really just about making sure that we're there for each other and that we reach out to each other. And also that it's funny because I have a complicated relationship with the phrase "it gets better," because when you're 16 and you can't access transitional resources where, you know, your family can't afford it or they aren't supportive, when, you know, you can't see your partner because your families won't allow it, it's a little hard to hear that, and it's a little hard to believe that it will get better. But ultimately things do get better. There's resources like the Trevor Project, which wonderful, incredible resource, and other national hotlines, the Trans National Hotline as well, for supporting youth in crisis. And so making sure that we are just there every single day, and that we are never take a moment to leave anybody behind, I think is really just so important. So that's my personal sort of piece there. And then as far as sort of the strategies and sort of and the tactics that I think are really important is making sure that you have allies, is that you know that you do have people in your life that you can turn to, whether it's friends, extended family members, what have you, that you know there are ways that you can set boundaries with your families. Finding physical space, I think, has been really important. I'm sitting here in New York City. I grew up in Boston, and I so miss, having trees and space and nature around me. And so, so we're all here living on top of each other. And so I think that's another crucial way, is just finding physical space for youth to be themselves, and where they can feel safe and be away from any sort of anybody who might be causing them harm. So I think it's a combination of all of those things, making sure that we just don't leave folks behind ultimately.
Any thoughts, Alex? Do you have any thoughts on?
It's tough. It's tough. We saw over 2,000 young people last year. These are 2,000 young people who felt safer on the streets than in their homophobic and transphobic homes. These are 2,000 young people who felt safer on the streets and in systems that are designed to protect them. And, advice for a young person who's in a situation like this, I really would encourage a young person to access resources to find where they might be able to escape if it comes to a point where they just can't bear it, and where the mental health services or the access services they might have from their home are not sufficient, or perhaps even not accessible because they've been blocked. I mean, I've heard some horror stories of young people who've been, who've had the world shun because of homophobic and transphobic parents who don't want them to see anything outside of what they want them to believe. And sometimes it's difficult. So I would encourage to really access resources. And if it's not safe for you at home, there are providers who can help you in New York City. There are providers who can help you across the country. In New York City alone, I mean, we've seen an increase in young people coming to us since COVID. And it's a real testament of how powerful and how just unforgiving homophobia and transphobia is. So I think that there does come a moment where the advice has to be flee. It's tough.
We have a question from Joanna Hernandez about homelessness. There's a handful of shelters available for LGBTQ. Currently, many of those shelters are not accepting people anymore. What can be done to help these young people find a safe space to sleep?
We are indeed. In New York City, there are over 4,000 homeless young people. There are fewer than 450 young beds for youth. The pandemic has obviously exacerbated, as we've heard, a number of social issues and community issues and homeless issues, of course. And we're actually working with the city and launching a hotel, opening a hotel that will hopefully be online next week, that will add capacity and add resources to young people. However, if a young person needs services tonight, there are a lot of resources right on our website. There's a resource that will allow you to connect you to beds that are available in the city as we get that hotel online. But we are certainly working as best as we can to bring other resources and add more beds.
We have a question about jobs. Young trans folks of color already had some of the highest unemployment rates with limited prospects beyond sex work and minimum wage before the impact of coronavirus. What can we do to make sure that when the job market turns around, we don't simply return to the racist, homophobic, transphobic systems of old? That's a great question.
The Ali Forney Center runs, I'll respond. The Ali Forney Center runs specifically a trans TGNC housing program. We also have a number, about 30% of the young people we see are TGNC individuals. And economic employment, economic stability, economic advancement is a huge part of the work that we do, particularly for TGNC individuals who do experience unemployment 4 times the national average. So we, in terms of the systemic demands, or what can we do now, I think that, helping programs that are building access to employment, that are building access to equitable employment is important. There are a number of organizations that could use support right now that are helping these communities, our communities, access improved employment and equal employment. There's a sex workers network. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. It's a really fantastic project that's helping our community. There's a number of career and educational readiness programs. AFC has a career education readiness program. I know HMI and a number of other youth providers have them that are really helping communities find equitable employment and sustain employment past COVID. So I really think supporting those organizations and supporting any social calls for just and sustainable employment after this is really important for us to do.
Yeah, and if I could also shout out just a few other organizations that I know of. Trans Latinx Network, formerly Trans Latina Network, fantastic for folks who are trans and and part of the Latinx community. Also, the center has a bunch of employment programs, and then my program, of course, because we work with youth, we're not necessarily thinking about employment, but we do have peer facilitation programs, peer leadership programs, and other things that help youth build their leadership skills, and things that they can take with them into the adult working world. So.
Yeah, I think, sorry, and those are great organizations. There's so many of them. There's also programs that are launching that are helping remote tutoring, mentoring, job skills development remotely, mock interviews, resume writing. Those are all things that we can be doing from home right now to help empower, enable, and encourage a young person to pursue employment past COVID and to have the strength and skills and even connectedness to do that. So I think there's a really good opportunity for our community to respond and to help from home right now.
You know, we've spoken about jobs and housing. Doug Worth has a question about sexual health. What are your thoughts on sexual health in the world of COVID-19?
On our chat and text services, if we've seen any questions come in around sexual health, we've been just following state and city guidelines. So I know like New York City, DOHMH put together a really great guideline on sexual practices during COVID. And that's one of the resources that we've shared out with our trained counselors who have been, you know, just communicating that information to the youth that we interact with.
And along these same lines, you know, Terry Wilhelm has a great question. What is your advice to an LGBTQ youth who's depressed, isolated, and possibly enticed by risky sexual cyber behavior as an outlet for repressed feelings and or suicidal ideation?
On our so a risky LGBTQ youth who is enticed by sexual behavior online, my advice to that youth would be that you matter and you deserve to be in an environment and interact with folks who affirm your identity. And at the Trevor Project, we don't necessarily get into the business of giving a lot of advice when we're interacting with youth. So we would just talk that youth through alternatives, talk them through safer options that they can, safer practices that they can utilize during their interaction with us. And basically safer practices that are either sustainable, safer practices that they can use after that chat. We also oftentimes offer callbacks to check in with folks and see how they're doing after their initial interaction with us. So definitely something that we would want to follow up with that person on.
I think as far as what you should say to that youth, in addition to everything that Kwesi said, just that you deserve to be respected. And even though that these are incredibly trying times, there are so many better practices and alternatives that you can respect yourself, your identity, and be who you are without engaging in those risky online behaviors. Additionally, that's a really risky way to get outed. If they are an LGBTQ youth, nothing online can really be erased, and reminding youth of that, because I feel like many high school, junior high school, middle school kids even think that when they're behind a username, they're invincible. And just having those conversations to make sure that they are being conscious of everything that they do online.
I'll add, as a sort of a social worker educator, that we've had this conversation a bunch in the past, and I've been very lucky to host a few workshops with youth that are amongst the topics are included is healthy relationships, sex ed. We also just did that topic in our support group as the last topic before we all went into quarantine life. And so I can definitely echo, thank you, Kwesi and Jordyn, for those that advice. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it definitely reflects the realities and the types of challenges and risky behaviors that youth are facing. And so I think that the psychoeducational piece is that's always my go-to. I'm always trying to push for psychoeducation. And so, we hosting workshops, building programming around making sure that kids are getting access to those kinds of educational resources around how can they take care of themselves, how can they maintain healthy relationships, how can they stay safe while online. I think that's also one of the next steps for sure, in terms of our program and hopefully other programs as well.
We will all, as a council member and as members of organizations, we've all been reinventing our offices and organizations to adapt to a world that none of us could have foreseen. And Samuel has a question specifically for AFC, which usually has an outreach team. What does outreach look like now in this time of social distancing? Or LGBTQ youth who weren't previously in contact with these organizations still finding services? So I'm just curious to know what specifically has this crisis had on your services. Have you reduced your hours? How have you reinvented your operations?
Sure. So we have outreach programs, that's street outreach and also online outreach. And we've been working to transform those into connecting with young people through social media, connecting with young people through any known email addresses we may have for them. A lot of the city outreach programs have shut down and moved into other functions or services because of the stay-at-home order, and really focusing young people who are on the street to engage in the limited drop-in services that are available right now. AFC also has drop-in services where young people are being sent to. We understand that hospitals, the NYPD, and a number of city agencies are aware of where to send young people when they are found, if they are hospitalized, if they are seen on a train or on the street. So there is engagement that the city is really focused on to help communities connect with services. As for our programs, our housing provisions have remained intact. We are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our doors do not close under any circumstance. I used to say we were even open during Sandy, and I think now we're saying we're even open during COVID. And we do not have the option to close. Our young people cannot call from home. We are their home. However, our drop-in services at the advice of our medical provider in coordination with the Department of Health and CDC did have to mitigate some of its services and really for the purposes of not having more than 10 people in one space. So we moved some of our services to a different location where it's more, where we can follow the policies and protocols in place related to social distancing. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Of course. Anyone else have any thoughts on how you're reinventing your operations and organization in response to COVID-19?
I wouldn't say reinventing. So rolling into COVID-19, we followed the news pretty closely and created some contingency plans. One of that was just basically getting our entire operation to a remote operation. So we have our Trevor Lifeline, which has been around for about 20 years, and we have physical call centers. So we had to work on getting those physical call centers remote while still providing uninterrupted services. So that was a huge change that we encountered. And then also all of our other services, we had to continue providing them remotely. As Alex said, we don't have the option of necessarily closing. Our mission is to end suicide amongst LGBTQ youth. And so we saw COVID, we adapted to COVID, and we're continuing to work towards that mission and continuing to support youth in crisis during the COVID pandemic.
I'm proud to say that our organization, we had to Ackerman, which is a large organization that our program operates out of, the whole building had to close, of course, with COVID regulations, starting on Friday, March 13th. And I'm proud to say that the following Monday, we were online with all of our services, and including training, clinical services and what have you. And so that's something that I think was really awesome that we were able to do that. I'm really, really proud of my team members who were able to make that happen. And then The other thing that I want to put out there is also, I really encourage anybody who's listening, please, please, please donate to your local queer orgs if you can, because I know that our organization, and I'm sure with many other nonprofits, we all had to push back a lot of our fundraising efforts into the fall and beyond. And so we, have put out calls for support. And I am sure that that is true of many other queer and trans nonprofits. And so please, please, if you have it, if you have the ability to do so, please consider donating to all these wonderful organizations so that we can all keep existing and keep doing the wonderful work that we're doing.
Here in New York State, almost all the COVID-19 fatalities have had at least one comorbidity, diabetes, hypertension. I'm curious to know what can be done to support those living with HIV in our present moment. It's a question from Michael.
For us at the LA Forney Center, at the onset of the pandemic, we engaged our medical providers, we engaged our health services counselors on understanding as much information as they could so that they can care for our young people and offering them services. I think that I saw this meme, and it was an elderly couple sitting on the couch, and the headline was, COVID affects the elderly. And the couple was sitting apart, and then they came together and they're embracing in this very fearful message. And I think that this understanding that comorbidity places you at greater risk of fatality for COVID has a really significant mental health impact. I mean, for those of us who don't have any pre-existing conditions, we're already scared. And to be told that you're in the at-risk group is even more terrifying. So for us, it was first understanding the science, the medical protocols around HIV and any pre-existing condition that our young people had, and educating those young people and really promoting social distancing sooner and engaging in self-care sooner, but also to the point of isolation and fear and mental health, was really ramping up our services, especially targeting our young people who we knew would have a greater impact because of what we're understanding of COVID-19. And I think, again, any responsible community should care for its most vulnerable first, and that's really what we've been doing.
So I'm going to combine two questions. The first question is from Joey. Watching all the news reports, one can seriously become depressed from the barrage of daunting stories. Often it seems to be doom and gloom. How do we keep young people motivated? And how do we engage our schools to protect and enhance the lives of young people currently and for the future? And Doug wants to know, how do we civically and politically galvanize LGBTQ youth? So those two questions. Anyone?
I think I've definitely noticed a trend of LGBTQ youth just having such difficulty watching the news, myself included in that. It is already very difficult to be at home hearing about it, hearing your friends, they're afraid of family members getting sick, family members and the workforce still, and then many of them are also affected by poverty at this point as well, and losing their jobs and parents losing jobs. So when you sit down, and the news is also completely devastating, it just makes you not want to watch. That being said, it's certainly important to stay updated, but there is definite good sides, silver linings that can be found if you go looking for them. A lot of people have actually been more connected with their relatives. They're calling each other more and staying more connected. I think they are being more creative. They're finding creative outlets. And I really just hats off to all of those people that are trying their best on social media, keeping each other upbeat. And I just think we have to hold out for the next couple of months. And once the economy reopens, you said, how do we get youth back engaged politically and civically? I think there's a lot of online campaigns that are happening right now. There's a lot of phone banking that can be done. There's a lot of politics happening, and all of it can be found online. So just accessing those networks and keeping in touch with all of their connections from schools and reaching out to teachers that are definitely still there to support them, I think are all great ways to stay engaged and stay positive. Overall, it's just going to be a push through.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that a little bit. And yeah, everything you just said, Jordyn, I think makes super sense. And I would definitely echo that. And then I would actually argue that a lot of youth don't really need to be galvanized. They just need access to the resources. They need the access to build power together and to build community. And so I've have a little bit of experience with community organizing. And so I've been lucky enough to go with NYTAG, the neurotrans advocacy group, up to Albany to do some policy work there. And there's always youth who come along to those things. And so I want to give a shout out to on April 21st. So next week, NYTAG is doing their virtual day of action. And then on May 7th, Equality New York is doing also a day of action that is not trans-specific, and that one is more for because the NYTAG one is trans-specific, and then Equality New York is generally for LGBTQ plus youth. And so definitely put that out there, like let people know we gotta just keep bumping up these events that are happening so that youth can hear about it, because I think that's really a lot of the barriers that youth just don't know what's happening. They don't know where to go and where they can put their time and effort into. So I think if we can help connect them to those opportunities, then it'll really help build power amongst youth in that way.
I just want to slide in the mental health aspect. So usually with pandemics, historically, mental health and mental health services is a consideration that's thought of after the pandemic's contained, after whatever it is contained, and everyone's safe to return to normal. I think given the current state and given the current technological capabilities, I think we need to rethink that model and provide mental health services, cost-free mental health services to LGBTQ youth now, so that we have youth who are somewhat resilient when this is all done and over with. Waiting till this is all done and then focusing on mental health, it may be a little bit too late.
Delilah, you also just prompted a thought of mine while you were talking about giving opportunities for youth. So in addition to the work I'm doing with GLSEN right now, the Capital Region Institute for Human Rights is a group that I'm also working with, and they have started a virtual campaign with hashtag We Can Together, which is just like a COVID-19 prompted program that allows youth to connect and highlight what we can do, even though we are stuck at home and we can't necessarily see each other. Here's an array of things that we can still do together, and it gives them a platform to connect. So that is just getting off the ground. It started about 2 weeks ago, but they do have an Instagram, a website. I think we still have the Twitter account, and that is something that I would highly encourage youth to get involved in from all over the state. I know you are all based out of New York City, but in the Capital Region, that's something that is trying to launch statewide.
So one of my favorite events of the year is Pride, and one of our questioners points out that Pride this summer seems highly unlikely. So this person is curious to know, what virtual Pride alternatives are all of you considering? It's a great question.
Yeah, Ali Forney is working on a number of virtual Pride events. First and foremost, with our young people, we have a group of volunteers and committee members, including some of our celebrity supporters, who are putting on a Pride event for our young people first. And then we also have community partners who are hosting events for us that will be virtual, like the Rainbow Room, and some of our corporate partners are looking at having a showcase. And one of the things that we've really tried to impart in this planning is that we have a unique opportunity to go back to our roots because there's so much that we're going to be able to divert from the flashy floats, which are great, but we have the opportunity now to really invest in messaging and services, and what would have been spent otherwise can now be invested in giving back to the community. So we have some unique proposals out and some significant interest in designing our Pride in a way that touches on the core issues that we address: mental health, homelessness, homophobia, transphobia, and engaging with our young people in that way.
We're still in the very early stages of planning what a virtual Pride would look like. So I don't know much details, but I know that our development team is currently working on it, and it's something that we've been considering.
Similarly, we are in the very early stages of planning. We are still transitioning to online programming through May, and we haven't quite gotten to June yet. But hopefully we will coordinate with GLSEN National, and we're able to put on a few youth events, just get everyone talking and maybe get some LGBTQ history involved, as Alex mentioned, just sort of returning to our roots. I think that's a really fantastic way of looking at it.
Yeah, I'll echo that sentiment. We just like GLSEN, we are also have only just gotten through May in terms of our biggest focus right now had been getting our support groups back online, which we were able to do in these past couple of weeks, and so we're working on support group programming for May. But no, this inspires me to make sure that this is a priority for June as well. And so but in the meantime, we've been just doing our best to signal boost any other efforts made by other organizations as well.
So even though we're in the middle of a lockdown, none of you have the luxury of closing shop. The work you do has never been more critical, but it's also never been more challenging. And so what can the community do to support you?
At Trevor, we continued training volunteers throughout the pandemic and onboarding additional volunteers. So there are volunteer opportunities, and I encourage anyone watching to visit thetrevorproject.org/volunteer, and we have volunteer opportunities that we can really use additional volunteers to help interact with the youth on our 3 platforms.
At the Ali Forney Center, we are launching our virtual volunteer engagement program. We currently have one of the most comprehensive volunteer programs in the city. Volunteers can engage anywhere from cooking a meal to reading, to helping with mentoring and tutoring, to helping with career pathways, mock interviews, to beautifying our sites and painting and organizing and cleaning, and helping our homes feel like homes. And as we shift with COVID, we are launching a virtual volunteer program that allows us to do a lot of those things, including sending care packages to sites. I think some folks like to be hands-on and may not like to have one-on-one interaction, but would like to provide perhaps a small library for a young person, or an art supply kit, or a birthday package, because we still have birthdays. So we are launching our virtual program. However, there are a number of organizations that have volunteer from home options. And I think it's a great opportunity to find unique ways and carve out some hours. I personally volunteer a few hours a week still. And I find it incredibly refreshing and reinvigorating in caring for our community.
I think Delilah mentioned it earlier, but now is a great time to donate to your local queer organizations. For GLSEN specifically, looking at school systems, giving support to all the educators that you know, and asking them what they need. It's a really hard time for educators right now, as well as the students. And educators might be the one person that a student at home can go to for help at this time, or feels comfortable going to for help at this time, and providing them with the support that they need, as well as any students in your lives.
And I'll just echo all of that, because we don't unfortunately have too many volunteer opportunities right now, as we're a clinic, and we require clinicians, with the license and all that kind of stuff. However, of course, we'll definitely signal boost any of those opportunities. I'm sure, especially as Pride events come up. And yeah, if you have any youth who are looking for support groups, I think that's the best way that we can, folks can help out right now, is to just, if you have any trans youth who are in need of community, if they're in need of support groups, if they're needing therapy, send them our way. And yeah, we'll be happy to help.
So we know COVID-19 is going to have long and lasting effects on our society. So many inequalities have been brought to light. I'm just curious to know, what are your thoughts on your vision of a post-COVID-19 world? And that will be the last question.
I think a lot of people have been stating, I can't wait for things to go back to normal. And unfortunately, the reality is for a lot of others that normal just wasn't good enough. And we can't return to the exact state of things as before. We have to push forward and become more active so that something like this doesn't have the same inequality. If something were to happen like this ever again, God forbid, it can't hit these communities as disproportionately as it has this time. So hopefully some people will be inspired to take action after all of this is over and really push for inclusive policy reform. And that's my vision, is just more activism amongst people to really improve their communities and not be satisfied with less.
I'm a huge optimist, so I've been thinking daily about what a post-COVID world would look like, and I see this as an instrument of change. And at the government level, I see us needing to focus more on public health, and I see us needing to focus more on mental health support. And we all are aware of disparities when it comes to employment, and we all are aware of the underemployment for our trans brothers and sisters, and we're all aware of the underemployment for non-binary folks. And I think we all need to work together to ensure that we fix those disparities. And like Jordyn said, we are not going back to normal, we're going back to a changed society.
That really, really inspires me to take action, and it just really warms my heart, because I completely agree. That's the crying message of all marginalized communities right now, is that normal wasn't working, like capitalism doesn't work. So something that I took from my time at Sylvia Rivera Law Project and my community organizing days was definitely that trans justice and queer justice is not just about our rights, but it's also economic justice. It's also racial justice. It's removing the economic and societal disparities, and making sure that minimum wage is raised, that we implement gender. That's a huge, big part of the next policy initiatives, is implementing and making sure that anti-discrimination practices actually are taking hold. It means supporting folks on the inside, trans prisoners as well, and working towards making sure that folks on the inside have the resources that they need. It's making sure that just everybody who are on the extreme edges of marginalization have the support that they need, and that I just really hope that the community care and the mutual aid that we've seen blossom during this time period continues, and that we all don't just go back to this individualist mindset of just taking care of ourselves, but continuing to take care of each other instead.
Yeah, that for us, at least for me, our hope is that this period of isolation, this union in isolation, also leads to a union in a new way of embracing unity and of embracing what we've been through together. And I think that we're seeing it across our programs at our sites. It's been difficult. There's been a lot of challenges. But with each challenge, there's been another side, like an emerging of unity. So I hope that this is just a new wave of union for us. I think we've seen it in New York after the September 11 attacks, after Hurricane Sandy, even trivial things like the blackouts, where the community just comes together. So I'm hopeful that this will bring about another wave of unity that makes us stronger.
That's great. I think we've been inspired by all of you to believe that social distancing can mean social connection and social solidarity. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for the work you do and for your commitment to building a post-COVID world that affirms and uplifts LGBTQ youth. And it was an honor to be the facilitator.
Thank you, Ritchie, for your service and for your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Cynthia.
Of course. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Cynthia's on mute. Cynthia.
Thank you so much for your participation, our panelists, Ritchie. I took lots of notes. And I just want to say that on behalf of the New Pride Agenda, we are very committed to be in work with you and other coalition partners like NYTAG, Equity New York, regarding system change that is needed at a city or state level, local level, related to what has been even more demonstrated with COVID-19. Let me go quickly to my colleagues, my partners in crime. Jason first, and then Ahmed, and then we'll sign off. Jason.
Thanks. First, again, thank you to Ritchie and our amazing panelists for your most importantly, like your work in service to our community. But then also equally important, you being here with us today. I just want to give quick updates that this is an ongoing series that we're going to be developing and continuing to create space for our community to engage on key topics. Next week, we're going to be having a conversation on sex and sex work during this time. We really want to make sure we're having a very open, inclusive conversation about what does sex look like for us as a community, and also sex work. And as we could support a community who may be engaging in sex work at this time. So we have an amazing panelist, so stay tuned for that. And then also we will be developing, what you could expect next month is conversations on mental health. What does mental health support look like during this time for each of us? And as a community, what services are available for our community, as well as talking about issues impacting LGBTQ folks who are immigrants and are undocumented. So we really want to make sure we hold space for those communities as well.
Awesome. And then lastly, before we sign off, thank you, Cynthia, Jason, fellow panelists and hosts for joining us. I'd like to extend that thank you to our attendees. This is who we do it for. We try to be as informative and resourceful as possible. In addition to all of the engaging questions you guys all probed tonight, a bunch of folks suggested resources or ideas for our community to galvanize around. And so please stay tuned for a resources update that the New Pride Agenda will provide to our network. You can check us out at www.newprideagenda.org to stay in touch. Please also follow us on Instagram at New Pride Agenda. And if you like this work and want to see it continue, please also donate to us at New Pride Agenda, the New Pride Agenda on Venmo. And if you also go to our website, you can find other means to show your support. And thank you again, everyone. Hope you guys have a good night and hope to see many of you guys in the future. Alrighty.